The beauty of live radio is that you can twist and turn things around, and now we're moving over to Arthur Goldstuck, who is a seasoned radio journalist who gives so much insight and gives so much to the world of media. He talks a lot around the ICT, around the media communications, around the internet and basic technology. And we talked to him today about the future of radio. Radio has evolved over the years, and what we see today is definitely what we saw 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And today we're just going to try and unpack what has happened to bring us here and what can we expect moving in to the future. So Arthur, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and welcome to Business Today in Africa on Africa Business Radio.
But it was only after democracy came to South Africa after 1994 where we really saw a dramatic shift in the radio culture and environment in general. And that was with the advent of commercial broadcast licenses being offered, and people had to put in bids for these licenses. And then along with those came the community radio stations, which also had to justify their existence, they had to apply for licenses. And suddenly, as a result of all of that, you have a rich radio landscape with many voices, many kinds of audiences, many subcultures being catered for by radio. So at the moment, although it might not be commercially the most successful era in radio, in terms of content and choice, it's the richest period in the history of radio in this country.
All right. You spoke about the advent of the internet. What other trends are shaping how radio has become?
What's happened in the last 10 years or so, especially as the cost of internet access has come down, certainly on computers, on PCs, not necessarily on phones, but is that more and more radio stations broadcast via the internet. So all they're doing is they're taking their existing broadcast and while they're broadcasting over transmitters and able to be picked up on radios, they also are streaming their content via the internet. So people can actually listen to a regular radio station on the web, on a website, even on their phone, if it's connected via Wi-Fi, because if you're doing it via mobile data, it can get pretty expensive. So those are the major kind of shifts that we've seen. And then along with that, we have more and more internet-only radio stations that have emerged. And the big examples are Cliff Central, Gareth Cliff's radio station, and Ball's Radio, which is a fully commercial radio station. They both are, but broadcasting only via the internet. So that will be a growing trend. The difficulty there is making the same kind of money from that kind of radio as you do from regular radio, because the listenership on regular radio is far higher. You can charge far more for advertising. Whereas on internet radio, it's quite difficult to sell advertising, certainly at the same level. So those who do it successfully, one has to say hats off to them, because it is so difficult.
Indeed, it is difficult. And I think, as you mentioned, those two online radio stations, we ourselves are an online radio station, and we can see how difficult it is for industry to accept a model of this particular nature like ours. And it is, I guess, one of those things that we need to navigate around. But we're still going to talk about that in our question just after this one. I'm going to ask you, Arthur, to look into your glass ball and let's try and predict what radio will look like in the next 8 to 10 years. I mean, we've seen where we are right now. Nobody could have predicted that we'll be here 5 years ago. What do you think could possibly happen in the next 5, 8, 10 years time from now on?
I think there's quite a few trends we're going to see. The one really interesting one, I think, is going to be hyper-localization or hyper-local broadcasting. So although the internet allows you to reach a global audience, I think you're going to find a lot of people who want to cater just for their community. And I'm not even talking about like community radio stations that focus on an entire city. I'm talking about suburban radio stations. So you might live in a big suburb that you feel a lot of interesting things happen, and you want to give coverage to the kind of people and businesses in that suburb, and you start a radio station. I think we're going to see a lot of that. They'll mostly be amateur radio stations. Some will have advertising, but again of a very limited amateur basis. And I think that's going to become a rich part of radio in the same way that the suburban press is quite a rich part of the newspaper environment today. So that's certainly one area. Another is that you're going to see more and more podcasts being produced by individuals, and those getting aggregated for a kind of online radio station where you build your own station. You can choose the pieces of the station you'd like to listen to, and it starts delivering the content to you that especially interests you. The other, I think, a really big trend that we're going to see is the ability to pull content from around the world and get very cheap syndicated content that allows anyone to build a radio station that looks and feels and sounds like a fairly professional radio station, but it's actually just a mix and match batch of content. It's a bit like on Twitter. You can sign up to a service called paper.li, where it automatically creates a newspaper that is pulled from links from sites and people that you follow on Twitter. So if you follow a lot of newspapers or journalists, it pulls their tweets out and creates a newspaper based on those tweets, links to actual news stories. And it looks like your own newsletter or newspaper, but in fact it's just an automated collection of links. And I think you're going to see a lot of that happening with radio as well. And it will be difficult for the public to figure out which are real stations and which are just aggregated stations. So that's going to be a threat to the advertising revenues of the big radio stations.
Precisely, I think that is one of the biggest threats, and that brings us to our next and last question: as how then will this now change how stations will be able to make their monies? Because we hyper localize. Only a few people will want to speak to a certain community, and you'll be limited to so much that you can charge. With the podcasts, it's going to be quite difficult as well to say you'll charge X amount of money, because you don't know who will be listening to those things and those aggregated content. So it just makes it very, very difficult for everybody around. So the next question is that how then will stations manage to survive? How do you think we'll be able to make money as radio stations? What kind of intelligent models do you think that we could come up with now? Because it's really difficult as it is right now.
I agree with you. I think radio stations have to evolve, and they have to realize that in a digital world, you can't only be one element of the digital stream. So digital allows you to broadcast sound and images, video, stills, etc., as well as text. So the likelihood is that the most successful radio stations will be, in some ways, TV stations as well. And in other ways, there'll be newspapers as well. So you'll see, for example, radio stations that currently have their own websites where they carry summaries of the broadcast news. They're probably going to have to invest a little more in-depth news as well as video content, and they're going to almost be a combination or a hybrid of radio, TV, and newsprint. And one other area I do believe where radio stations have an advantage is they have real personalities on air, and those personalities are often larger than life. And perhaps it's some way for listeners to interact more directly with those personalities via the internet or via the digital media. I think there's a lot richer engagement that can happen via the internet and via digital channels than what we're currently seeing on radio.
I think if these radio stations like ourselves and all these other ones online fail to adapt, they'll be extinct quite pretty soon. Judging by how you are predicting the future, and we can already experience all of these things in the current environment as it is right now. But thank you so much for your time, Arthur. This is quite a useful insight that you're not only giving us, but you're giving the listeners as well to see exactly where these things, or where this trend is going, as it were, and what is it that we could expect in the next years to come. Your insights are very valuable, and we appreciate it, Arthur.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing you evolve rather than become extinct.
We really hope so as well. Thank you so much. That was Arthur Goldstuck, a journalist and a media specialist, as well as a dissenting voice in the space of technology, ICT, internet, and communications, and giving his expectation of how things will be, and giving us a background of how things were for us to get to where we are right now. Quite frightening, if you ask me, about how things have been coming up and how things have been seeming. But there is no hope lost, because with everything that happens, everybody needs to evolve and come up to the party. Because if you fail to evolve, you then face the risk of being extinct. We'll go to a quick break.